Immigration showdown. A congressional committee grills the Homeland Security chief. Interfaith effort. Pope Francis rallies religious leaders to end modern-day slavery by 2020. Decision time. Will another Bush run for president? We could find out soon. And pampered babies. We look at the latest trend in spas. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, December 2nd, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. The political maneuvering continues over the president's executive action on immigration. Chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFranchi has more tonight. Suzanne?
Good evening, Brian. Well, the Republicans are coming at the president full force today. House Majority Leader John Boehner announced that the House may try to undo the president's executive actions on immigration later this week.
This is a serious breach of our Constitution. It's a serious threat to our system of government. And frankly, we have limited options and limited abilities to deal with it directly.
Boehner admits the move is mostly symbolic, a public venting for House conservatives who are outraged over Obama's unilateral actions. Meanwhile, Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson defended Obama's new immigration plans before a House committee. He took harsh criticism from Republicans while gaining support from Democrats.
There is common ground that could be had, but the president and the record is clear. When they had the chance with the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they didn't even introduce a bill into the committee, let alone bring it through the process.
As I understand the executive order, it does not confer immigration status, nor does it confer a pathway to citizenship.
Johnson argued that the president acted within his executive authority, repeatedly offering to negotiate a bill with Congress.
I believe that if we could just strip away the emotion and the politics on this issue, and you brought me the right group of members of the House of Representatives, I could negotiate a bill with you.
Well, the clock is ticking for House leaders to pass a spending bill, and they run out of time by December 11th. Back to you, Brian.
All right, Suzanne LaFranchi at the White House. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The president is likely to tap former Pentagon official Ashton Carter to replace Chuck Hagel as defense secretary. This according to a senior Republican senator. Administration officials say Carter has emerged as the top candidate, but the president has not made his final decision. Carter is a physicist who is well respected at the Pentagon and has support among Republicans. If nominated and confirmed, he'll take over a sprawling department that's been at odds with the White House in recent years. Three founders of Hong Kong's pro-democracy Occupy movement are calling for an end to the protests. The two professors and one pastor say they will turn themselves in to police Wednesday and take responsibility for the damage done by Occupy Central protesters. They're urging others to switch to more peaceful education tactics. Meanwhile, students and other demonstrators continue camping out in protest. On Monday, student leader Joshua Wong said he and two friends are staging an indefinite hunger strike to drive home their demands. A teenage girl with bombs strapped inside her hijab has been caught near a busy market in Nigeria. It is the same market that's been hit twice recently by female suicide bombers. 77 people have died in those bombings, according to Nigerian health workers. This brings the death toll to 247 in a week of increasing violence attributed to an Islamic uprising in northeast Nigeria. Radical Islamist militants killed 36 workers at a quarry in northern Kenya this morning. An eyewitness says Al-Shabaab terrorists separated out non-Muslim workers and executed those who would not recite the Islamic creed. Kenya's national police chief later stepped down. The nation's president says this massacre followed the same pattern as other attacks against Christians in the region.
The obvious intent is to create hostility and suspicion across ethnic and religious lines, and to drive non-Muslims from certain parts of this country.
Al-Shabaab says the attack at the quarry was in response to Kenyan airstrikes in Somalia. The Kenyan government insists the airstrikes were a counter to other acts of religious violence committed by al-Shabaab in recent weeks. The Dominican Republic's top prosecutor praises the Vatican's handling of the sex abuse case against a former apostolic nuncio to the island nation.
We have a lot of confidence in the Vatican State tribunals. We have talked with the judge who is presiding over the tribunal's preliminary investigations. We've also analyzed the procedural situation of the case with them.
Joseph Wasilowski is the former Vatican ambassador to the Dominican Republic. A Vatican court found him guilty of abuse in June, imposing the toughest penalty under church law, laicization. That means he can no longer celebrate the sacraments as a priest. Religious leaders from a half-dozen faiths have signed on to a new Vatican initiative to end modern-day slavery by 2020. They're declaring that human trafficking, forced labor, and prostitution are crimes against humanity. We're joined from Rome by Gary Haugen, president and founder of International Justice Mission. Gary, I know you've made the freeing of human slavery a life work, and I just wanted to know what you think about this declaration that's been signed by about a half a dozen faith leaders, the significance of that.
Well, this was a truly historic day today with the Holy Father hosting a really unprecedented gathering of diverse religious leaders to make it clear that slavery is still a problem in our world today. There's actually more people in slavery than at any other time in human history. And not only is it a problem, but there is a tremendous imperative on the religious leaders of the world to express their moral authority in galvanizing the world to actually end slavery in our lifetime.
35 million people enslaved across the world. The goal is to set them free by 2020. Is that a doable, is it a reachable goal, and how can it be done?
Well, I actually think it is possible in our lifetime to see slavery mortally wounded, to actually see the laws against slavery enforced so that law enforcement no longer is protecting the traffickers or protecting the slave owners, but actually protecting the children and the families that are being abused. What we found out about slave owners and sex traffickers is that they're not brave people, and when they start going to jail, this plague can actually end.
Is there anything that regular people can do to bring an end to slavery around the world?
Absolutely. The first thing, we have to be aware of it, and that's what happened today, is that the Pope and these other religious leaders were raising their voices to say this is still a problem in our lifetime. And that's what every person can do, is begin to raise their voice, but also contribute to efforts to actually rescue people from slavery and make sure that this is a priority amongst all of our government leaders of ending slavery. And they will do that when they know that the people, the common people and voters care and make this a priority issue.
Pope Francis has made this a priority. He is using the world stage as the Holy Father, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, to really bring this to the attention of the world. Do you think that's effective? And what has your experience been like working there with the Holy Father and the others at the Vatican?
This is tremendous. The Holy Father brings hope to millions of people who are in slavery today because he is galvanizing not only the Catholic Church, but religious leaders and leaders of goodwill all around the world to address this problem. The greatest burden for those who are in slavery today is that they think no one cares, no one knows about them. But the Pope began to change that equation today and brought hope to millions. And that was great moral and spiritual leadership today.
Well, it's certainly great to touch bases with you, Gary Haugen, the founder of International Justice Mission. Thanks for joining us from Rome tonight.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Coming up, we talk with the founder of a group devoted to preserving ancient Christian culture in the Middle East. Slaves, no more. We are all brothers and sisters. Hashtag end slavery. A tweet from Pope Francis referring to his interfaith effort to end modern-day slavery by 2020. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday, December 2nd. I'm Brian Patrick. The suspected wife and son of the leader of an Islamic State terror group are being held in Lebanon. A Lebanese official says they were carrying fake identification and were detained about 10 days ago. Meanwhile, Congress is focusing on Westerners joining the terrorists. Our Jason Calvi reports.
Brian, the group that's beheaded Americans and pushed out Christians and other minorities is also recruiting many Westerners. They hold passports that could get them back into countries like ours. And today, a State Department official told members of the House he's concerned those fighters could return home to carry out attacks. He says the U.S. is working with other countries to stop Islamic State members from flying home. But he was challenged at a House hearing today.
Has the State Department canceled the passports of any U.S. citizens who have joined terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq?
To my knowledge, the State Department has not canceled any passports.
And why is that? Because we had Secretary Kerry.
A Homeland Security official told the committees that more than 100 Americans and a total of 2,700 Westerners have traveled or tried to travel to Syria to join ISIS. Deputy Assistant Secretary Tom Warwick says that could have an impact in the United States.
DHS is unaware of any specific credible threat to the U.S. homeland from ISIL. However, as has been noted, ISIL has encouraged its supporters to carry out attacks.
And also today, House and Senate negotiators came together and agreed on a proposed $585 billion defense bill. It includes funds to continue the fight against the Islamic State. It would also train moderate Syrian opposition forces. The full House is expected to vote on this proposal this week. Brian?
Thanks, Jason. Dr. Amal Marogy is the founder of Eridan Charitable Trust, devoted to preserving ancient Christian culture in the Middle East. What kind of cultural treasures should Christians be concerned about in this part of the world?
We have old languages and cultures in the Middle East. Aramaic is one of the oldest languages that is attested actually for 4,000 years. So it is really what we are, the heirs of a long tradition, 4,000 years, and that language has been spoken in our families, in our communities for so long. And now we are facing the danger of losing that language. I can only talk about my family. You know, like after we left Iraq, now the next generation in my family doesn't speak Aramaic. I mean, my sisters are fighting with their children to speak Aramaic. One of my sisters is married to a Belgian, and her children, they understand Aramaic. They started praying. I mean, the first thing that they said in Aramaic was Hail Mary and Our Father, very sweet. But they understand it, they can translate, but they don't speak it. So down 2 generations, you know, that's probably is going to be the end of Aramaic in our family, and you can replicate that and, you know, like just multiply it by all these families who have left Iraq.
So we're talking really here about a whole way of life, a language, a culture, versus just artifacts, right?
Absolutely. I think that everything goes together. I'll just give you an example. You know, like when I was trying to talk about what we are trying to do in Eridan. It was in Cambridge. We had one of these training sessions on how to use Twitter in academia. And one of the colleagues, you know, like what I was trying to explain to him, he said to me very calmly but coldly, honestly, I can't care less about one more church burned or bombed in Syria. That's least of my worries. And I said, yes, neither do I. You know, like that's least of my worries as well, because as Christians, you don't need a church to pray. We need, and as Catholics or Orthodox, you only need bread and wine to celebrate Mass. Muslims don't need a mosque to pray. They can pray in any corner of the street. And the Jews, the same. I mean, they kept the faith alive, and they stayed, you know, like, they stayed Jews and faithful to God during 40 years, you know, like while they were wandering in the deserts.
So is it possible to maintain a culture, to keep it alive in the midst of such violence?
It is, but it is, of course, now you have priorities. If you have so many people being persecuted and displaced, basically, and leaving with only the clothes on their backs, you know, like when you come and say, yeah, but culture is important, people look at you and say, yeah, but people are more important. But at the same time, culture is important because if you rob a community from its culture, from its manuscripts, from its language, there's absolutely nothing left of that. You can kill a community in 2 ways, by killing its culture or by killing its members.
We report almost every day and have been for months about ISIS, the Islamic State, overrunning these areas in the Middle East. This really hits home for you because your family was directly affected. You're from Kirkuk, right?
Yes, I'm from Kirkuk, yeah. And my family was directly, you know, like I was, one of my aunts was taken hostage by ISIS. She's a nun. She's one of the 2 nuns who were taken hostage by ISIS. There are 2 orphan girls with them. But what is beautiful, I mean, I talked to them and I asked them, there was that question, why did they go? And she said, she was really pushed. It was as if someone was pushing her to go there, even though that she didn't want to go. But she said, they said something very beautiful. We prayed for everyone, absolutely for everyone, from the Pope to the very last baby who is still in the womb of the mother. The 2 girls, when I asked them if they were scared, and they said, no, we weren't scared because we've never felt God so close to us as we were when we were there and taken hostage.
A beautiful witness, Dr. Amal Marogy. Thank you for making this so personal to us. We appreciate you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Well, politicians and pollsters are already looking to 2016. A new CNN ORC International poll shows Mitt Romney and Hillary Clinton topping a potential list of 2016 presidential contenders. 20% of the conservative voters polled pick Romney as their first choice for the Republican ticket, although he said he's not planning to run. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton received an overwhelming 65%. Other potential Republican candidates include retired neurosurgeon Ben Carson. He had 10%. Followed by Jeb Bush and Chris Christie. For Democrats, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren is favored by 10% of those polled. She's followed by Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Well, one of the potential Republican candidates may be launching a campaign very soon.
Running for president, and I'll make up my mind in short order, not that far out into the future. I don't know the exact timeline. It's the same decision.
Brother and son of former presidents spoke last night at Wall Street Journal event here in D.C. He called for a more active foreign policy and argued for an overhaul of entitlement programs, immigration, and education policy. Sounds like he's running already. Attorney General Eric Holder says the Justice Department plans to end racial profiling, ensuring fair and effective policing. Holder says new federal guidelines will end racial profiling once and for all. Spoke last night at the Atlanta church where Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. preached. Holder, who is leaving the Justice Department, says he wouldn't be where he is today if it wasn't for Dr. King.
Who could have imagined 50 years ago that a black man would be the Attorney General of the United States, serving a black man as President of the United States?
The new guidelines on racial profiling were drafted after the recent shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Up next, the outcome of a case before the U.S. Supreme Court this week could have wide-ranging effects for pregnant women in the workplace. On Tuesday, December 2nd, you're watching EWTN News Nightly. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court this week hears a case of alleged job discrimination against a pregnant woman. Peggy Young worked as a part-time driver for UPS, the package delivery company. Because she was pregnant at the time, her doctor said she couldn't lift anything heavier than 20 pounds. She was told by the company she could not continue her present job, but didn't qualify for a temporary assignment. Her lawyers say this violates the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. 2 lower courts ruled in favor of UPS. The Supreme Court hears her case tomorrow. Amy Howe is editor of SCOTUSblog. That's a website written by law experts focusing on the Supreme Court. Everybody's watching this case. What do you think is so significant about it?
It's significant on 2 levels. First, many women become pregnant, obviously, and a lot of them, particularly when they're working in physically demanding jobs, may need some accommodations, whether that's bed rest or sitting on a stool instead of standing at a cash register. And so this decision could impact a lot of women across the country in a variety of jobs. The second is a more meta level. Last term, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's the only member of the Supreme Court to have actually given birth, accused some of the male justices of having a blind spot when it comes to women's issues. And so I think a lot of people will be watching this decision closely to see how receptive the justices are to Peggy Young's arguments and how the decision ultimately plays out.
So this is an issue that there's interesting agreement among feminists and pro-lifers about this. That makes it unique, doesn't it?
It does. You have sort of what we think of as the usual suspects, women's rights groups and labor groups who filed friend of the court briefs in support of Peggy Young. But there have also been some pro-life organizations who have filed briefs supporting her. And their argument is that if women worry that they're going to lose their jobs and lose their pay when they become pregnant, they may be more likely to have an abortion.
That's a real issue. 2 lower federal courts have ruled in favor of UPS. How do you expect the high court to rule here?
We'll know a lot more after tomorrow's oral argument. One of the reasons why the Supreme Court frequently takes cases is, as it did here, to resolve divisions among the lower federal courts of appeals, to sort of bring a unified rule to the country. So certainly it will be thinking about what some of the other courts have done to a certain extent. To a certain extent, it also starts with a clean slate once it's got a case before it. And it frequently will grant certiorari, grant review, to reverse the lower court decision. So Peggy Young may have that going in her favor.
Well, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission recently changed pregnancy guidelines. Will that impact this case?
It might. One factor that I think some justices may be skeptical of is that the EEOC didn't actually issue these guidelines until after the Supreme Court had granted review last summer. So it may not give them the same weight that it might in other contexts. UPS is also saying that perhaps the federal government has been inconsistent on this issue, that the Department of Justice has actually defended similar policies by the U.S. Postal Service. And so they may be a little bit skeptical of the guidelines and not necessarily as willing to defer to them as they might otherwise be.
It will be an interesting case to watch, and we
appreciate
indeed your expertise here. Amy Howe, editor of SCOTUSblog, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me.
And a Texas spa draws a young crowd, very young. Catherine Zeltner shares why this may be a good thing for both moms and babies.
Preparing for a day of pampering.
You ready?
But at this Houston spa, that means fluffy towels, animal toys, and swim diapers.
He always has a huge smile on his face.
Owner Christy Eisen says Float Baby is more than a spa.
Coming in here and, becoming stronger, becoming more aware of their body, getting early right brain, left brain activity before they start to crawl.
Babies as young as 2 weeks old are placed in cloth-covered flotation devices. Then the fun begins.
They love it, and a lot of times the little ones fall asleep in the water. So it's very soothing, and it's a very natural environment for them.
Yet the baby spa is still a novel concept. Why Dr. Megan Belcher says it's hard to weigh the benefits.
If parents are happy, the babies are happy, and the physician has no problem with it, then at this time it doesn't seem to be harmful.
According to Eisen, spa visits help both baby and mom. Leah Jones says her 16-week-old son Shane loves his weekly visits. Afterwards, sleeping between 11 and 12 hours at night.
It's stuff that we weren't doing with him at home. He doesn't have the ability to move in this weightless environment. He certainly wasn't moving his arms and hands as much.
As for the clients, they seem to especially enjoy the massage after picking up some new friends. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Catherine. Cute babies. Well, items from a popular TV show are now part of American history. Fred Savage, who played Kevin Arnold on The Wonder Years, and other cast members donated items from the show to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History today. Included are costumes, studio tapes, scripts, and Polaroid photos from the show. Savage's family knew there was a reason he kept the items.
This is crazy. I can't believe we're at the Smithsonian. Myself, my brother, my sister, would always give her a hard time. And would say, why are you saving all this stuff? Why do you have all this junk? And she always had the same response. She would jokingly smile and look at us and say, well, one day the Smithsonian might want it.
And they wanted it. The hit series ended in 1993. Savage has moved on to directing television shows. He says The Wonder Years was special because it celebrates the achievements of everyday life. That was a great show. Well, until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again anytime you like on EWTN's YouTube page. We hope you're having a good Advent, and for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night, and may God bless you.